Okay guys, welcome back to another episode of Rotten Reviews. On this episode, I'm going to take a look at the 1986 movie Cobra with Sylvester Stallone and Brigitte Nielsen. It has a 14% on the tomato meter and a 42% on the audience score. It is rotten. I wouldn't expect anything but a critic's review of this to say that it's rotten from any time period. Personally, I find this movie still enjoyable today. I don't consider this highbrow entertainment or worthy of some kind of award, but I think this is an accurate representation of a fun 1980s action hero flick, kind of for the MTV generation. It had a pop rock soundtrack. It had Sylvester Stallone kind of playing up all the stereotypes of an 80s action hero. Even at the time, this was considered him playing this as in an over-the-top fashion. It was his crazy 1980s take on a Dirty Harry movie. It worked at the time. It was up against some stiff competition. For example, Top Gun. Top Gun completely overshadowed this at the box office, although this was a moneymaker. It was profitable. I find this enjoyable even today, and I would consider it worth watching again. It should be worth watching to somebody that's younger and wants to see just how crazy and over the top the 80s were for action movies. And, you know, you can make fun of it because Stallone and other people at the time, including myself, who was high school aged at the time, we made fun of this, but at the same time, we really enjoyed it. It has an iconic scene in which Sylvester Stallone's Dirty Harry character named Cobra. You know, the most iconic part of this is when he sits down in his apartment and he puts his gun on the table twice and proceeds to use a pair of scissors to cut a piece of pizza off and have it for lunch. It's hard to describe. You have to see it. It's just bizarre. It was bizarre at the time, but you know, it's something that sticks out in your mind even after 20, 30 years. Cobra, it's over the top weirdness. He has a revolver that he tucks into his pants that has a cobra on the handle. So anyway, let's get into the reviews. And right off the bat, October of 2019, 5 stars. How dare anyone not give this masterpiece 5 stars? If you like 80s action movies, you'll love Cobra. Personally, I give this like 2 stars. I acknowledge it's bad. It's got, continuity errors in the action scenes. There are expensive for the time action scenes, chase scenes. It's got like obvious flaws there that you can see on first watching, but yet it's still enjoyable to watch it. I would give it a solid 2 stars. Stallone, his co-star in this is Brigitte Nielsen, who was soon to be his ex-wife or was in the process of becoming his ex-wife at the time she filmed this with him. And she wears a wig during this entire thing, and it's obviously a wig, except in one almost MTV video sequence in which she plays herself as a sexy model, having kind of a model MTV video shoot. She's not wearing a wig during that, but she's wearing it for her character in the rest of the film, and it's kind of funny to watch it. Again, I find this like a cult classic type of style. This is like a weird cult classic for people my age. So let's continue. 2 stars. Cobra is an over-the-top, no pun intended, action movie starring Sylvester Stallone as a cowboy cop who takes on a serial killer. That's the entirety of the plot, and it's clearly trying to be Dirty Harry. The main character, Marion Cobra Cobretti, is pretty much the same character as Harry Callahan. He doesn't play by the rules, he hates criminals with a burning passion, and he constantly gets yelled at by his superior detective Monty. The film is trying so hard to be Dirty Harry. Yeah, it's trying hard to be Dirty Harry, but it's trying to do Dirty Harry but jump the shark at the same time. Sylvester Stallone's Cobra, he has a toothpick in his mouth the entire time. For example, in one scene where he fights somebody in a supermarket, he stops to crack open a beer and enjoy a beer, a Coors or a Coors Light, before he proceeds to the rest of the action. He even tells the bad guy in this scene, the bad guy threatens him with blowing up the whole store. He replies quite funnily that, well, it doesn't matter because he doesn't shop there. You have to see it to see how crazy it is. They're clearly trying to jump the shark and, kind of outdo Dirty Harry, and it's funny to watch. 3.5 stars. A good action slasher film for Christmas and Halloween. Yeah, this is actually set during Christmas, but it's in Los Angeles, in the Los Angeles area, so you could easily miss that this takes place during Christmas, but it does. There are Christmas trees and etc., even though it looks like it was shot in, in the bright summertime. I don't know when it was exactly shot, but it's supposed to be Christmas. And the other funny thing is that this is like, I guess the original purpose of this script, it was supposed to be a slasher film, more of a horror slasher film, and be more serious and dark. But somewhere along the line, they decided to just go ahead and make it an action movie. And so it starts off with a villain that's kind of a cult leader, and he's got a cult that meets in this shadowy underground basement, and they kind of clash their axes, their hand axes together over their heads in unison, and they're like chanting things, and he's up against this cult leader. It's very strange, and it kind of went from a cult leader type villain into, defeating an action villain at the end. It's weird. It's weird in its own special way. 3.5 stars. If you like 80s action flicks, this definitely fits the bill. 1.5 stars. A film of unfiltered and infantile fascist fantasizing in case of the quip, "You're the disease, I'm the cure," wasn't already clear enough, not just in its nigh pornographic glorification of violence, but in the false vilification of human rights as voiced by straw men, egghead, milquetoast defenders. Canonical scale 5 out of 5. Somehow I didn't expect to see Stallone eating pizza with scissors in such a hyper-violent, Dirty Harry ripoff. This is somebody that this reviewer obviously takes this film way too seriously. Again, I was the target audience for this film back in when this was released in the theater. I didn't take this that seriously. I wasn't supposed to. None of us did. So yeah, it's interesting to see how reviewers take this seriously as though they're watching some serious crime drama and they don't realize the joke is on them. 3 stars. Cobra is great in a cheesy way. It's a fun, breezy movie starring cool Sly Stallone, then at the height of his physical prowess and blockbuster status. Cobra isn't the best 80s actioner, but if you're in the mood to kick it old school and revel in the 80s era of the action, Cobra will satisfy. It moves at a decent pace and has all the stuff you would want from an 80s action flick. All the cliches and genre tropes are heavily poured into the film. It's not so much a script the film follows, but the basic outline. Yeah, this follows the basic outline of any 80s action movie. It's trying to do this. It's trying to go over the top. It spent a lot of money going over the top. It worked for what it was. 2 stars. Cobra, the epitome of 80s action movie cheese. This is definitely not one of Sly's best movies, but it's definitely entertaining for corny's 80s action if that's what you're looking for. You can see a little bit of what Stallone would later do in Judge Dredd in the 90s. You could see that in this movie. He's not in a costume like he is in Judge Dredd, but definitely he's great at playing this kind of over-the-top cheesy action hero character. 1.5 stars. Knockoff of 80s action films and done poorly at that. Nothing was done well. Acting, script, and action all terrible. Was rather mean-spirited too, taking the rogue cop stereotype and turned up to 11. Yeah, again, you're taking this way too seriously. 2.5 stars. Conceived as another dumb 80s extravaganza action flick, Cobra combines Stallone's acting and writing along George P. Cosmatos' direction, offering little to no originality or uniqueness, not even for the action it goofily handles, with almost no style or substance behind either the story or the action sequences, and failing to provide its lead star anything worthy of previous entries. But as it is silly, it is cheesy and entertaining enough to be valued as a guilty pleasure. I'll largely agree with that. Just the fact that people today in 2019 can recognize the line, "You're the disease and I'm the cure," tells you that this has reached cult status, cult film status. 2.5 stars. Conceived as another dumb 80. Okay, that's a repeat. I don't think it has to be read twice. It was right the first time, largely. 2.5 stars. It was a fairly interesting action flick, but was way too cliched. Yeah, if you were trying to take it serious. Um, 4 stars. Creative and cheesy as it gets. Cobra is a fun, action-filled thriller with everything an 80s film has to offer. Yeah, and the soundtrack's pretty good. It's got like a pop rock soundtrack that like is complete 1980s. It sounded good. I can't name the songs, but they worked. They had the 1980s feel. One of them kind of has the riff, "Feel the Heat," and it's kind of like the music is actually pretty good. It is a representation of a good 80s action movie music, but in today's world, it would be considered completely dated. Again, you can't take this 100% serious. We didn't at the time. 4 stars. Schlocky, over the top exploitation picture, but oh so good. It's cliche, but who cares? It's got some great action, and Stallone being a badass. Yeah, it's he can play this type of character in his sleep. Particularly in this movie, he never takes off his sunglasses. That makes it easier. I'm sure that made this really an easy time for him as an actor. You take Stallone, that's already kind of got that wooden action hero face, and then you stick like these sunglasses on him and put a toothpick in his mouth, and he just has to hold, a scary looking assault weapon in one hand, Terminator style. That's all he had to do. This was just made for him, and I'll bet this was the easiest time filming an action movie he ever had. 4 stars. Awesomely bad 80s movie, so corny and funny. I love this movie. Oh, the characters are just great in it. I never get sick of watching this movie. Oh, and so many cheesy one-liners. Yeah, I think this is on Netflix, so if you've got Netflix, it's worth queuing this up just to enjoy yourself. 2.5 stars. Cobra is the epitome of B-movie, like the 80s excelled in providing us. There is a story floating on the web that states that the reason Stallone wanted to shorten the runtime of Cobra was because he wanted the film to run 5 to 6 times in a day. Well, that didn't happen because Cobra was savaged by the critics, though it was a box office hit. But the film is now considered to be something of a minor cult classic. Stallone is the main character, a no-nonsense cop, and gets entangled with a biker gang. Well, it's not really a biker gang, it's like a cult. But the cult part of it was kind of abandoned towards the end and forgotten about. But no, it's like an axe wielding cult that meets in a basement and clangs these axes together. And that's kind of memorable too. Like it doesn't go anywhere with that, but it's actually something that's memorable. So it worked in some regard. It had to, or I wouldn't remember it. 2.5 stars. Sylvester Stallone's Cobra. He didn't direct it, but such was his clout and influence, you might as well consider it his film. Is an intentionally hilarious action movie which was ripped apart by critics upon release, but the passage of time has somehow made it endearing, and now the film is constantly listed in the list of cult movies. Stallone plays a dirty Harry-esque tough cop who talks in punches and one-liners. His job is to safeguard a woman who was privy to a murder against a bunch of axe-wielding maniacs. Yeah, it's completely like a cult. It's a cult movie now. It was ripped apart by critics. I would expect that. No critic is gonna like say that this is a good film. And it was up against Top Gun, but again, even with all that, this movie made quite a profit from what I understand. 4.5 stars. Because of its rating of 17% on this site, I was very skeptical about watching, as I don't trust a movie if its rating is bad on Rotten Tomatoes, but I decided to give it a go as I am a fan of cops and serial killers, and I will say it was quite nail-biting and kept involved, and seeing Sylvester Stallone in action makes it better. I wouldn't give it 4.5 stars. It wasn't all that, but it's worth watching once. 2.5 stars. Sylvester Stallone's Cobra. He didn't direct it. Okay, we've read that. 3 stars. It's not that bad. It's actually awesome. 3 stars. Could be better. This movie is one of those cases that half the audience likes and half do not like, and I perceive every chick in sight. In my opinion, this movie leaves a lot to be desired. I think this movie has some script problems. I thought this is one of those movies where good guy always escapes from bad guy. Also, I thought it had too much action and a little history. But besides, I really liked the movie and I recommend it to a lot of people. I think the special effects were fantastic. There weren't really any special effects. It was all practical effects, and There were problems with the car chase scenes and the action. It had continuity errors, and it had, obvious problems with the props where you could see the flaws in them. But again, it wasn't enough that made it not fun to watch. 2.5 stars. It's hard to find a single aspect of Cobra that hadn't been done before or hasn't been done better since. It's hokey and way too self-serious given the content, but if you're hankering for some of that sly action of yore, you shouldn't go past Cobra, unless it's for any number of the nearly identical but better movies he did in the same era. Yeah, even at the time, Stallone knew this wasn't anything new, and he tried to go over the top, and he did. This goes more over the top. It asks you in the story to take it serious, but then it goes over the top, trying to jump the shark. It doesn't always succeed, but it really is trying. So even he knew at the time that this was not exactly going to be loved by the critics. 1 star. Cobra is a disappointing film. It is about a tough-on-crime street cop who must protect the only surviving witness to a strange murderous cult. Sylvester Stallone and Brigitte Nielsen gave terrible performances. The screenplay is badly written. George P. Cosmatos did a horrible job directing this movie. I was not impressed with this motion picture. Yeah, because you're taking it too serious. Once you see Brigitte Nielsen in that wig, you know this isn't going to be that type of movie, right? You're trying to take this serious. 5 stars. Cobra is so badass. He drinks the soda before he lets it go to waste and eventually smokes the cocksucker in the grocery store. Haha. Great 80s action movie. No, it's actually beer. I don't know if you're seeing something else than I am, but he was actually drinking Coors or Coors Light. He popped that open and enjoyed it before he smoked the bad guy. It wasn't soda pop. 5 stars. You want a movie that makes you think? You want a movie that has deep, significant meaning? Then go away. This isn't the movie for you, and that's how I like it. Cobra is pure action, sappy one-liners that you love to repeat, and the action that goes over the top but is so much fun to watch that you can't take your eyes off it. It's almost an 80s reboot for the original Dirty Harry, and of course you have 2 alumni from the first Dirty Harry in it, Andrew Robinson, Scorpio, and Renee Santoni. Yeah, I didn't know that. There were actors in this that were in Dirty Harry. That's interesting. 3.5 stars. Schlocky B movie classic. 0.5 star. Tries way too hard to be way too cool. Ends up a large pile of cheese instead. You know that scene where Stallone cuts the scene where he sits down in his apartment and cuts the piece off the end of the pizza and then snacks on the piece that he cut off, the piece of pizza. It makes no sense. It's bizarre. He uses a pair of scissors. It's iconic. And not only that, but if you watch that scene, you'll notice that he pulls his gun out and puts it on the table 2 times in the same scene. Again, it's a continuity error. They left it in. But again, it's iconic. It's 80s movie action icon stuff. I'll never forget that scene. 5 stars, 10 out of 10. I love it. Before this, I was a little very sad person. Stallone is greater than Marlon Brando. It's the real true Oscar need to nominate that movie one day. Yeah, some people, as a cult film, they love it so much that they'll take this over anything. I don't think it's all that. But again, I guess that's what cult movies are. People take them way too serious. I'm just saying this is a fun movie to watch. 3 stars. Marion Cobra Cobretti, what a name, only in the 80s. This is a wonderful over-the-top 80s movie with the violence turned up. Not for everyone, but for fans of the genre, a real slice of American cheese. A young and hot Brigitte Nielsen, who Stallone would marry, is the woman in peril. Actually, they were already married. They were already on their way to a divorce. But besides that, you're right about the over-the-top violence. At the end of the movie, Cobra hangs the bad guy on a meat hook, literally, and not only just hangs him on the meat hook, but he screams and screams in pain like a maniac. It is turning it from action movie into a gore movie almost. It's very strange how it kind of mixes that. 1.5 star or 1.5 stars. Allegedly, Stallone was in the running to play Axel Foley in Beverly Hills Cop, but declined because he didn't like the script and wasn't allowed to change it. Apparently, this messy and stupid film was his answer to Beverly Hills Cop. Yeah, in a lot of ways it is. Can you imagine if Stallone had been allowed to do what he wanted and be in Beverly Hills Cop? It would have been total insanity. It would have been a dud, of course. So I'm glad he didn't do that. But yes, this was his version of Beverly Hills Cop. He's got a toothpick stuck in his mouth. He never removes his sunglasses, and he hangs the bad guy on a meat hook at the end. Yeah. 3 stars. Cobra has its moments throughout. A rather spectacular car chase and character moments coming from the titular character played by Stallone, who in turn does a decent job of conveying a harsh and unconventional detective. Yet, unfortunately, it takes no real liberties regarding story and incredibly safe in every execution of its storytelling and ultimately rather bland. Yeah, this reviewer is trying to be a film critic. He's trying to say that it's fun, but still he's applying, a serious movie review eye to this. You're coming at it from the wrong view if you try to actually review this as though it's a serious film. 3.5 stars. A brutal movie with one of the best and most original deaths of a villain. The film does not have much going for it, both from the story or characters, but it still manages to be a great 80s action. It is by no means Stallone's best work, however. The dark tone is surprisingly fresh when you consider that Lethal Weapon, RoboCop, and Beverly Hills Cop were released a year earlier, or a year later. There's just something about this movie that is so good that one can only understand once you've watched it. Well, this reviewer brings up RoboCop, but if you actually watch RoboCop today, it does have a lot in common with this, and it is over the top violent and stupid and gory at certain parts. And Stallone could have been in RoboCop, no problem. He would have worked in RoboCop, looking back on it. 1.5 star. A really bad movie about a supposed to be badass cop played by Stallone. This is like Rocky meets Rambo, who becomes a cop to stop a crazy serial killer group. It's a bit over the top and dumb. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. That's exactly what it's supposed to be. So don't expect this to be like, I don't know, think more along the lines of Rocky 4, more than the first Rocky. The first Rocky is a critically acclaimed film, not an action movie, whereas Rocky 4 is a comic book action type movie using the characters from Rocky. They're in completely different genres, even though they're both called Rocky. That's the way to look at this. This is more of a Rocky 4, not an original Rocky. No Academy Award winners here. 3 stars. Not a good movie at all, but it was fun enough to be worth the price of admission. This reviewer is from 2017. If he saw this in the theater, I kind of envy him. I didn't get to see it in the theater. I had to wait till it came out on HBO. But I imagine that in the theater it was really even better to see this over-the-top nonsense in the good way. 4 stars. So first of all, and I did not realize this, but the movie is called Cobra because the titular character is named Marion Cobretti. I thought it was kind of a far-fetched name, but when I Googled it, I found a Facebook profile of a real guy with that name who likes intellectual techno. That has nothing to do with the movie. Cobra starts a little slow and begins looking like something like a Dirty Harry movie with detective work and a stakeout. However, the movie is basically all-out action. Yeah, this is a long-winded way of saying that they appreciate it for what it was, I suppose. 4.5 stars. Amazing from start to finish. 3 stars. An armed gunman causes a hostage situation at a Los Angeles grocery store. That's a synopsis. Yeah. 3 stars. I've seen the movie Cobra several times over the years, and each time I liked it more and more. I thought it deserved at least a 3-star rating, if not more. 4 stars. Cobra suffers with its ridiculous plot, over-the-top acting, and cheesy one-liners, but that is the same reason we love this movie so much. Yeah, I'll agree with that. Everything that the critics would say that's bad about this movie is why people actually like this movie. 3.5 stars. Hilarious, over-the-top 80s action B-movie brilliance. 3 stars. Cobra's gun is a rare showcase of an eccentric piece of 80s weaponry. Other than that, this flick is pretty baseline for 80s action films. It's baseline, but more memorable. So I think that's why it deserves its cult status. It's not just a forgettable 80s action movie. There are hundreds of those. This one stands out in a bunch of ways, so this is worth watching as an example of the time period. As it's an example of the ridiculousness of the 80s action movie time period. 4 stars or 4.5 stars. Cobra is a truly jaw-dropping action thriller with inspirational one-liners such as "This is where the law starts" or "This is where the law stops and I start," and an ending that is truly inspirational. Well, that reminds me again, very much like Stallone in his Judge Dredd movie from the 1990s. That type of line, "This is where the law stops and I start." That's classic Judge Dredd type stuff. Again, this movie reminds me of Judge Dredd in a lot of ways, but it's set in the previous decade. 4 stars. I've always viewed this film, for better or for worse, as the epitome of 80s action films. It's so on the nose in terms of all the 80s action film cliches that the film can easily be viewed as an iconic parody or ironic parody. However, and I'm not quite sure why, but I really do love this film and consider it something of a guilty pleasure. I felt a little vindicated in my love of Cobra when I read on IMDb that Nicholas Winding Refn, the director of Drive, is a huge fan of the film. Yeah, this film made an impression on a lot of people, not just on fans or not just on audience members, but on people that would go on to produce other things in Hollywood. So it deserves its cult status. 3.5 stars, an enjoyable, if predictably cheesy 80s action must-see. 2.5 stars, a classic Stallone action film, so bad as good. 1 star, Cobra, 1986, one-man police force, Stallone pits against night creeps. More focus went into how many different ways you can set somebody on fire than story, character design, dialogue. Pre-title sequence actually rips off opening of Magnum Force. Great poster though. Yeah, it's supposed to rip off other stuff. Again, 1 star because they took it too seriously. They didn't see this for what it was. 1.5 stars. At least the model doesn't get killed, even though dozens of other people do in the killer's attempts to kill the model. Also, fuck due process. Fuck yeah, tight jeans. Yeah, that's what this is about. In this type of movie, you know, the bad guy has plot armor. The heroine is always saved in the nick of time, although everybody drops dead around her and is hit by every bullet meant for her. That's you know exactly what they mean by typical 80s movie. 80s action movie. 4.5 stars. Terribly awesome 80s sly action classic. This movie has everything you could ever want in a terribly awesome 80s action movie. Stereotypes, music montages, action, bad special effects, a car chase, bad acting, terrible one-liners, you name it. Cheesy fromage at its finest. But the best part is the director's commentary. I'm sure he's inebriated and keeps getting more so as the movie goes on. A must-watch. Well, you know, if somebody has the DVD of this and it has the director's commentary, if he's drunk and gets more drunk, then that's awesome. He's ahead of his time. This would be a YouTube watch party nowadays. So, yeah, I'll say that director was ahead of his time. 2 stars. It's almost like a film class shot this. A few great moments for lighting, editing, locations, and intro. To editing or script editing. As a classroom project, this would earn a B-. No, if this were a classroom project, it would be held up as the shining beacon of what you know, film class students can do when they're left to their own devices. No, this is just too much of a cult status classic to be the result of just film students. Everybody that made this film knew what they were doing and they did it deliberately. It took skill to make this. 5 stars, Sylvester Stallone in Sylvester Stallone. You know, that's a good way to leave this one. This is not only an example of an 80s movie, an 80s action movie. It's not only a fine example of the genre, but it's a fine example of Stallone, of what Sylvester Stallone thought of Sylvester Stallone, and you know, that's what it is. This is Sylvester Stallone telling the audience that he knows what he's good at doing, and he embraces it here, and he gives it to the audience. He gives them everything they wanted. This was a successful film in its day, right alongside Top Gun. So, I think I've proved my point that this is worth watching even in 2019. So get on Netflix and get out there and start viewing it. And I will see you again on the next edition of Rotten Reviews.